The emergency alarm shrieked through the 40-story glass tower as Maria Santos dropped her mop and heard the words that made her blood freeze. "Hay una bomba en el edificio," the panicked man shouted into his phone, unaware that the quiet janitor mopping nearby understood every word he spoke. "Bomb in the building." 300 people in the lobby began pushing toward the exits, but Maria knew something they didn't, and her next words would determine if they all made it out alive. Before we continue, if you enjoy incredible real-life heroism stories, make sure to click that subscribe button. This is the best way for you to support our work. Thank you very much, and let's continue. Maria had been invisible for 38 years. Not literally, of course, but in the way that janitors, housekeepers, and maintenance workers become part of the building's furniture. Essential, but unnoticed, working while others lived their important lives. At 5'2", with calloused hands and premature gray streaks in her dark hair, she moved through the gleaming corridors of Meridian Financial Tower like a ghost, cleaning up after people who made more in a day than she made in 6 months. But invisibility had taught her to observe, to listen, to understand the rhythms of panic and the subtle signs that separated real danger from false alarms. And on this ordinary Tuesday morning in downtown Chicago, those skills would prove more valuable than any MBA or corner office. The day had started like any other. Maria's alarm buzzed at 4:30 a.m. in her cramped studio apartment on the South Side, where she lived with her 15-year-old daughter Elena. The teenager was still asleep, textbooks scattered across her makeshift desk. A card table Maria had bought secondhand and painted white to make it look more dignified. Elena was brilliant, maintaining a 4.2 GPA while working part-time at a local grocery store to help with expenses. She dreamed of becoming a doctor, and Maria dreamed of making that possible. The commute to Meridian Tower took 90 minutes on 2 buses, but Maria never complained. This job was better than most. Steady hours, decent pay for cleaning work, and health insurance that covered Elena's asthma medication. The building was 40 stories of steel and glass housing 3 major financial firms, 2 law offices, and a prestigious consulting company. Maria knew the names of maybe 20 people out of the thousands who worked there, but she knew every inch of the building itself. She knew that the elevator on the east side made a grinding noise that meant the motor needed servicing. She knew that the floor-to-ceiling windows on the 32nd floor had a hairline crack that would worsen if not addressed. She knew that the water pressure in the men's restroom on the 15th floor dropped every afternoon at 2:15, when the coffee shop below ran their dishwasher cycle. She knew these things because she paid attention, because her job depended on noticing what others missed. And she knew languages. Maria had grown up in a Mexican-American household where Spanish was spoken as often as English. Her late husband, David, had been Egyptian-American, and during their 8 years together before his sudden death from a heart attack, she had picked up conversational Arabic. Elena was learning French in school and practiced with her mother every evening. Languages had always been Maria's secret superpower, the ability to understand conversations that others assumed were private. The morning routine at Meridian Tower was as predictable as sunrise. Maria arrived at 6 a.m., 2 hours before the first office workers, and began with the lobby. The vast space was a shrine to corporate success, marble floors that cost more than Maria's annual salary, abstract sculptures that she secretly found ugly, and a reception desk carved from a single piece of Brazilian rosewood. She worked systematically, mopping the marble to a spotless shine, polishing the brass fixtures, and ensuring that every surface reflected the building's commitment to perfection. At 7:30, the first wave of early arrivals began trickling in. Lawyers clutching coffee cups and cell phones, analysts reviewing reports, executives whose names appeared on business magazines. Maria had learned to read people by their morning routines. The nervous tap of heels meant deadline pressure. Whispered phone conversations in the elevator meant confidential deals. Expensive suits with wrinkled shirts meant someone had worked through the night. By 8:15, the lobby was filling with the main rush of workers. Maria had moved her cleaning cart to the far corner, working on the windows while staying out of the flow of foot traffic. She was wiping down the brass handrails when she noticed him, a man in his 30s with a thick beard and nervous energy, pacing near the elevator bank while speaking rapidly into his phone. At first, she paid little attention. Nervous phone calls were common in a building full of high-stress jobs, but something about his body language caught her eye. His free hand kept clenching and unclenching. His eyes darted constantly, around the lobby, not with the casual awareness of someone waiting for an elevator, but with the hypervigilant scanning of someone expecting trouble. Maria had seen that look before, during the months after 9/11 when everyone was on edge, when security guards learned to recognize the difference between ordinary anxiety and something more dangerous. This wasn't deadline stress or pre-meeting nerves. This was fear. She moved closer, pretending to clean a section of wall while straining to hear his conversation. The man was speaking Arabic, assuming that in a financial district in Chicago no one would understand. but Maria caught every word, and what she heard made her hands tremble as she gripped her cleaning cloth. "The device is in place," he was saying, his voice tight with stress. "But something's wrong. The timer isn't working properly. It was supposed to detonate 20 minutes ago." A pause as he listened to whoever was on the other end. "No, I can't just leave it. If it goes off now with all these people here, there will be hundreds of casualties." Maria's breath caught in her throat. She forced herself to keep cleaning, to maintain the invisible facade that had protected her for so many years. But her mind was racing. There was a bomb in the building. The bomber was having second thoughts about mass casualties, and she might be the only person in the lobby who understood what was happening. The man continued his conversation, growing more agitated. "You told me it would be empty at this hour. You said the cleaning crew would be gone and the offices wouldn't open. Until 9. Look around. There are hundreds of people here." His voice rose slightly, and a few nearby business people glanced in his direction with mild annoyance before returning to their phones and newspapers. Maria realized she was witnessing a bomber's crisis of conscience. Whoever had planned this attack had miscalculated, expecting the building to be nearly empty. Instead, the lobby was packed with innocent people going about their morning routines, unaware that their lives hung in the balance of one man's internal struggle. The bomber listened to his phone for a long moment, his face growing pale. When he spoke again, his voice was barely above a whisper, but Maria was close enough to hear every word. "You're insane. I won't murder 300 innocent people. I'm calling the police." He pulled the phone away from his ear, but before he could end the call, his handler's voice rose to a shout that Maria could hear clearly. "If you call the police, I'll detonate it remotely right now. Every death will be on your head." The man's face crumpled with despair. He looked around the lobby at the crowd of morning commuters, young people starting their careers, parents thinking about their children, elderly security guards nearing retirement. Maria watched his shoulders sag as the weight of an impossible choice settled on him. That's when the first person noticed something was wrong. A sharp-eyed executive near the elevator bank observed the man's distressed state and whispered something to her colleague. Their conversation carried just far enough for others to overhear fragments. "Suspicious behavior. Seems agitated. Should we call security?" The whispers spread like ripples in a pond. Maria watched as awareness crept through the crowd. Not knowledge of the actual threat, but the collective sensing that something was amiss. A few people began backing away from the bomber, though they didn't yet understand why. Others pulled out their phones, some to call security, others to record what they assumed might be a minor disturbance. The bomber noticed the changing atmosphere. His panic intensified as he realized he was being watched, that suspicion was building around him. Into his phone, he spoke a single word that Maria understood perfectly. "Now." But instead of an explosion, the building's fire alarm system erupted to life. The bomber had pulled the alarm in a desperate attempt to evacuate the building without revealing the true nature of the threat. For a moment, Maria felt relief. The alarm would clear the building. People would evacuate in an orderly fashion. The bomb could be defused by professionals. Then the chaos began. 300 people hearing a fire alarm in a 40-story building don't evacuate calmly. They surge toward the exits in a primal rush to escape potential death. The problem was that Meridian Tower, like many older office buildings, had been designed with beautiful aesthetics rather than optimal emergency egress. The lobby had 3 exits, but the main entrance was a revolving door that could only handle a few people at a time. The side exits were locked during business hours for security reasons, controlled by an electronic system that was supposed to unlock automatically during emergencies. But the system malfunctioned as hundreds of people pressed toward the exits. They found the side doors locked, creating a deadly funnel that directed the entire crowd toward the single revolving door. Maria watched in horror as the orderly Tuesday morning transformed into a stampede. The first person fell near the revolving door, knocked down by the press of bodies behind them. Then another. The crowd began to pile up, people climbing over. Those who had fallen, panic overriding compassion as the fire alarm continued its relentless shrieking. Maria could see that within minutes people would be crushed to death, and the very evacuation meant to save them. She looked at the bomber, who stood frozen in horror at what his well-intentioned alarm had triggered. She looked at the crowd, pressing forward with increasing desperation. She looked at her cleaning cart, her mop, her uniform that marked her as nobody important. And then Maria Santos stopped being invisible. She climbed onto the reception desk, her worn sneakers gripping the polished rosewood as she pulled herself up to standing height. From this elevated position, she could see the entire lobby, could see the crushing crowd and the expressions of growing terror on hundreds of faces. "Stop!" she shouted, her voice cutting through the alarm and the sound of panicked voices. A few people near the reception desk looked up in surprise. A janitor on the furniture was so unexpected that it briefly penetrated their panic. But her single word wasn't enough. The crowd continued surging forward, driven by primal fear and the assumption that movement toward any exit was better than standing still. Maria realized she had perhaps 30 seconds before the situation became irreversibly deadly. She took a deep breath and did something that went against every instinct developed over 38 years of invisibility. She made herself the center of attention. "There is no fire," she called out, her voice carrying across the marble space with surprising authority. "The alarm is false. There is no fire in this building." More heads turned toward her now. The novelty of a janitor giving emergency instructions was enough to create small pockets of stillness in the surging crowd. But it wasn't enough. She needed to give them a reason to believe her, a reason to trust the judgment of someone they had never noticed before. "My name is Maria Santos," she continued, her voice strong and clear. "I've worked in this building for 7 years. I know every system, every alarm, every safety protocol. I know when there's real danger and when there isn't. This alarm was pulled by mistake. There is no fire." The crowd was beginning to listen, but Maria could see doubt in their faces. Why should they trust a janitor over their own eyes and ears? The alarm was still screaming. Their instincts still told them to run. That's when she made the decision that would define the rest of her life. "I have a 15-year-old daughter named Elena," she said, her voice carrying clearly across the lobby. "She's at school right now, probably in her chemistry class, dreaming of becoming a doctor. If there was real danger in this building, do you think I would risk never seeing her again? Do you think I would tell you to stay if I wasn't absolutely certain you'd be safe?" The honesty in her voice, the specific detail about her daughter, the raw emotion of a mother's love, these things cut through panic more effectively than any official announcement could have. The surging crowd began to slow, people looking up at this small woman who had made herself vulnerable in front of hundreds of strangers. But Maria wasn't finished. She had captured their attention, but she needed to hold it long enough for the real solution to unfold. She could see building security finally responding, working to unlock the side exits manually. She could see the bomber still standing frozen, unsure whether to run or help or disappear into the crowd. She had bought some time, but she needed to buy more. "I know you're scared," she continued, her voice now conversational but still carrying clearly. "I know every instinct is telling you to run, but sometimes the bravest thing we can do is stand still. Sometimes the safest choice is to trust someone who has no reason to lie to you." She paused, looking out over the hundreds of upturned faces, seeing them as individuals rather than a crowd for the first time. "I see you coming to work every morning. I know your routines, your habits. The woman in the blue suit gets here at exactly 7:45 every day and always takes the east elevator. The man with the red tie stops at the coffee cart and orders the same latte. The young man with the backpack is usually here by 8, but he's running late today and he looks worried about making his meeting." As she spoke, people began to recognize themselves in her descriptions. The woman in the blue suit looked down at her outfit in surprise. The man touched his red tie unconsciously. The young man with the backpack smiled despite his lingering fear. "I see you because my job is to take care of this building, and that means taking care of the people in it," Maria continued. "Right now, the safest thing for everyone is to move slowly toward the exits. The side doors are being unlocked manually. That's why they were stuck before. Form lines help the people who fell, and walk, don't run, to safety." The psychology was working. By acknowledging their fear and giving them specific, concrete actions to take, Maria was channeling their panic into purposeful movement. The crowd began to organize itself, people helping others to their feet, forming orderly lines toward the exits. But the bomber was still there, still holding his phone, still connected to whoever was waiting to detonate the device remotely. Maria could see the desperation in his eyes, the terrible knowledge that his attempt to minimize casualties might have failed, that his handler might trigger the explosion out of spite or tactical necessity. She made eye contact with him across the lobby and spoke directly to him, switching to Arabic in a voice that was gentle but firm. "I know what you're carrying," she said, the words clear in the sudden relative quiet as the crowd began to move in an organized fashion rather than a panicked surge. "I know someone is making you choose between terrible options, but you pulled that alarm because you don't want innocent people to die. That makes you different from whoever is on that phone." The bomber's eyes widened in shock. In all his planning, in all his preparation, no one had anticipated that a janitor in a Chicago office building would speak fluent Arabic. "You can still choose," Maria continued, maintaining eye contact. "Your handler isn't here. He's somewhere safe, asking you to do what he won't do himself. But you're here. You can see their faces. You can choose to be the person who saved 300 lives instead of the person who ended them." The lobby was nearly empty now, people filing out through the unlocked exits in orderly lines rather than the deadly crush that had threatened moments before. Building security was coordinating the evacuation, and Maria could hear sirens in the distance as emergency responders raced toward the scene. The bomber looked at his phone, then at Maria, then at the few remaining people still moving toward the exits. His face was wet with tears. "He'll detonate it anyway," he said in Arabic, his voice breaking. "If I don't do it, he'll trigger it remotely. All these people will die because I hesitated." "Then we take that choice away from him," Maria replied, calmly. She pulled her own phone from her pocket and held it up. "I'm going to call the bomb squad. They can disrupt his signal, jam his communications. But I need to know where the device is so they can evacuate that area completely." For a long moment, the bomber stood perfectly still. Maria could see the war raging in his mind, years of ideology and indoctrination fighting against the immediate reality of human faces and human lives. She watched as he looked around the nearly empty lobby, at the few stragglers still heading for the exits, at the security guards who were now approaching cautiously. "Third floor," he whispered finally. "Men's restroom near the northeast corner, behind the ceiling tiles above the last stall." Maria nodded and speed-dialed 911, speaking rapidly to describe the situation and the location. Within seconds, she could hear the dispatcher coordinating with bomb squad units already en route to the building. The bomber ended his call and dropped his phone, crushing it under his heel. "I'm sorry," he said, still speaking Arabic. I thought it would be different. I thought I was fighting for something pure, something worth dying for. But I can't murder innocent people. I won't." "You didn't," Maria replied softly. "You chose differently. That matters." Security officers reached them then, professionally, restraining the bomber while Maria explained the situation to the building's head of security. The man listened with growing amazement as she described the false alarm, the near stampede, and the location of the explosive device. Within 20 minutes, the bomb squad had secured the device and confirmed it was disarmed. The bomber's handler, tracking the situation through news reports, apparently triggered his remote detonator several times, but the signal jammers prevented any connection. 300 people had evacuated safely, the building was secure, and Maria Santos found herself sitting in a police interview room trying to explain how a janitor had prevented a terrorist attack. Detective Sarah Morrison was a 20-year veteran of the Chicago Police Department who had seen her share of extraordinary situations, but Maria's story tested even her experienced perspective. "Let me make sure I understand this correctly," Detective Morrison said, reviewing her notes. "You understood the bomber's Arabic conversation, realized there was an explosive device in the building, witnessed the malfunction of the emergency exit system, climbed onto the reception desk to address a panicking crowd, convinced 300 immobilized people to evacuate calmly instead of stampeding, talked a terrorist out of committing mass murder, and then helped us locate and disarm the bomb?" "I just did what needed to be done," Maria replied quietly. "Anyone else would have done the same thing." Detective Morrison looked at her steadily. "Mrs. Santos, in 20 years of police work, I can tell you with absolute certainty that very few people would have done what you did today. Most would have run, some would have hidden. Almost none would have made themselves a target to save strangers." The story dominated the news cycle for weeks. Maria Santos, the guardian angel janitor, as the media dubbed her, found herself thrust into a spotlight she had spent decades avoiding. Interview requests poured in from national news programs, talk shows, and documentary filmmakers. The building's management offered her a substantial reward, which she quietly accepted and immediately put into Elena's college fund. But the real change in Maria's life was more subtle and more profound than media attention or financial rewards. For 38 years, she had been invisible by necessity and choice, moving through the world without making waves, accepting that her role was to clean up after other people's lives rather than actively shape her own. The terrorist attack had forced her to choose between safety and courage, between invisibility and action. In choosing to save others, she had discovered something about herself that she hadn't known existed: the capacity for leadership, for command, for inspiring others to be better than their fears. The building's management, recognizing both her heroism and her intimate knowledge of the facility's systems, offered her a new position as head of building security. The salary was 3 times what she had earned as a janitor, with full benefits and opportunities for advancement. Elena would be able to attend college without crushing debt, maybe even pursue medical school. But more importantly, Maria found that she was no longer invisible. Employees who had passed her for years without acknowledgement now greeted her warmly. Security guards sought her advice on building protocols. Management consulted her on safety improvements and emergency procedures. Elena was initially overwhelmed by her mother's sudden fame, but ultimately proud beyond words. "I always knew you were a hero, Mama," she said one evening as they sat together in their small apartment, now brightened by flowers and cards from grateful strangers. "I just didn't know everyone else would figure it out too." 6 months later, Maria stood in the Meridian Tower lobby during the morning rush, but her perspective had completely changed. She wore a professional suit instead of a janitor's uniform, carried herself with quiet confidence instead of invisible efficiency. and saw the crowd of commuters not as people to clean up after, but as people under her protection. The building had implemented new emergency systems based partly on her. Recommendations, additional exits, improved communication protocols, and regular drills that she personally supervised. The northeast corner of the third floor, where the bomb had been placed, now housed a small memorial plaque acknowledging the day when ordinary courage prevented extraordinary tragedy. The bomber, whose name was eventually revealed as Ahmad Hassan, had cooperated fully with authorities and provided information that helped dismantle the terrorist cell that had recruited him. In a letter he wrote from federal prison, he thanked Maria for helping him choose humanity over hatred, for seeing him as a person capable of redemption rather than just a threat to be neutralized. But perhaps the most significant change was in Maria herself. She had spent her adult life believing that her value lay in her ability to remain unnoticed, to be helpful without being important. The crisis had taught her that sometimes the most important thing you can do is refuse to be invisible, to step forward when others step back, to speak when others are silent. She thought about this as she stood in the lobby that morning, watching the familiar flow of people heading to their jobs, their meetings, their important lives. They still didn't know all their names, but she saw them differently now, not as people above her station, but as fellow human beings deserving of protection and respect. At exactly 8:15, she noticed a new employee struggling with the building directory, clearly lost and increasingly frustrated. 6 months ago, Maria would have walked past, assuming that helping wasn't her job. Today, she approached with a warm smile. "Good morning. Can I help you find something?" The woman looked up gratefully. "I'm looking for Morrison and Associates on the 14th floor, but I can't figure out which elevator bank to use." "East elevators will be fastest," Maria replied, gesturing toward the appropriate direction. "Have a great first day." As the woman hurried off with a thankful wave, Maria reflected on how much had changed and how much had stayed the same. She was still taking care of people in this building, still making sure everyone was safe and comfortable. The difference was that now she did it from a position of respect rather than invisibility, as a valued professional rather than an overlooked service worker. Her phone buzzed with a text from Elena. "Don't forget, I have a college interview this afternoon. Thanks for making my dreams possible, Mama. I love you." Maria smiled as she put her phone away. Everything she had done that terrible Tuesday morning had been driven by the desire to make it home to her daughter. In saving 300 strangers, she had also saved her family's future, transforming their lives from survival to possibility. The morning rush was nearly complete, the lobby settling into its daytime rhythm. Maria Santos, former invisible janitor, current head of security, and always a mother who would do anything to protect the people she cared about, began her daily walkthrough of the building that had become her domain. She was no longer invisible, and she never would be again.